thank you for coming early on a Friday afternoon. It's always my pleasure to do this. I want to thank Chris and the Oregon Athletic Coaches Association and Nike and all that, because I enjoy this. I enjoy working with coaches like yourself, learning from you, and hopefully you learn a little something as we go along here. The title on this first talk tonight is Powerful Performance Protocols. And I use the term protocols because there has to be a certain system or method to how we improve performance. And as I watch, especially a lot of the younger coaches that I work with now, the people that I have on my staff or the young coaches come in, it's not always that way. There's an approach to doing things, but the systematic protocols aren't always in place. And so it's preparation and training, whether it's 6 months before the competition or 6 minutes before. Those protocols and those concepts have to kind of be in place. So for me, if you've ever listened to me before, you're going to see this slide. You always start with why, the golden circle, Simon Sinek's golden circle of start with why. So again, for me, it's about burst, acceleration, and surge. Doesn't matter what event in track and field, doesn't matter what sport, this is, for me, the why we do things. And right now I work with a lot of distance runners. In fact, I'm working with more marathon runners than ever before, and having worked with ultra-marathon runners since when I was living in Colorado many years ago, and now I'm back working with ultra-marathon runners a little bit. And this is still a factor. To make a medal stand or to win a big event in even the marathon or the 10,000 meters, you still have to be able to surge. You have to either catch somebody or leave somebody along those things. And obviously in any type of sprint or explosive event on the field, the ability to burst, accelerate, or surge through those movements is a big deal. But we've known this, whether you look at the GPS data that's in all kinds of different sports, or even if you just think back to when you were out in PE or in recess and you wanted to play tag, the kind of people you wanted on your side of the tag team were the people that could burst and surge. So it is the number one factor of either great or elite athleticism. If that's the why, then what's the how? How we rehearse it. How do we consistently and constantly rehearse the ability to have these types of mechanics and these types of capabilities? And then for me, the outer circle of the what is what do we need to eliminate? What's kind of been a common practice for us, but it takes us away from this? What are things that have been common in how we train and how we work out, and hey, feel the burn, and hey, wow, I'm sweating, that was a tough workout, but it actually took us away from our ability to perform better, whether it's in practice or in competition. So for me, I call this failure practice. We're actually practicing failure. We're either working too slow and too heavy, or we're doing all kinds of things that aren't really in the context of how we negotiate the ground or the ring or the runway or the mat or whatever it is. We're taking it outside those areas of, again, the protocols for performance. What's within the construct of how we perform? Give you the prime example. This is a very old slide. I've been using this slide for many, many years. I just update the research articles from time to time. And so obviously I've been using this since about 2004. And since then, there have been over 200 studies. And those studies show this, that static stretching before practice or games or competitions or meets, static stretching, 75% of those studies showed a decrease in performance. 25% of those studies, a quarter of those studies, show no changes in performance. They didn't decrease, but they sure didn't increase performance. 0 of the studies showed increases in performance. But, okay, let's say, well, that's okay. we're not all about just increasing performance. We want to decrease injuries too. Okay, and that's why we static stretch before we practice or perform. Well, if you look at those studies over the years, there's been anywhere to 40 to 70% increase in injuries when they look at this type of thing. Okay, but what do we still see? Like I say, when I first started using this slide, like in 2004, this kind of research was 30 years old then. But we're creatures of habit, right? So we still, and my wife gives me a bad time because we actually used to teach PE together. And she goes, well, you're just against static stretch. I thought, I'm not against it. It's great afterwards. It's great after the practice. It's great in the evening. You know, we want to improve flexibility, but we're talking again about protocols for performance. So if we want a protocol, this is not it, okay? So, and again, we've known for many, many years the benefits of more of dynamic warm-up, dynamic movement things. It does a lot of the same things that the static stretching does in terms of, you know, metabolic processes and decreased viscosity, and all those kinds of things that we're getting. But the other thing we get from it is rehearsal. We can increase the neural pathway efficiency of how we move and how we move better. We can activate those specific motor units. We can also mentally prepare, because if you're truly doing a dynamic warm-up, then you're warming up not only just with the same movements, you're not just trying to get loose, you're also trying to rehearse the tempo and the rhythm of how you want to perform. If you want to perform fast and explosive, then rehearse it and prepare for it. Protocols for preparation. Not to mention, you're going to use the biomechanical skills that you want to run, jump, throw, whatever with. So again, we look at this whole thing. Well, again, some of the stuff we do, we're doing to decrease injuries and problems. Okay, well, here's another thing. And again, these studies go back a long way. What are the minimal factors that affect overall muscular health from that standpoint? Well, okay, well, the muscles are weak or they're not flexible. Like your hamstrings are always having issues because they're very weak, they need to be stronger, or they're not very flexible. Well, there's plenty of studies that show that that's not a major factor. Might be a minimal factor, but not a major one. Well, fatigue, you get more injured when you're tired. Well, we're going to talk about in the next, in the later on this evening, we'll talk about the fatigue fitness factor from there. But again, most of the studies show that that's a minimal factor, small factor, not a major one. Well, we're not warming up long enough. It's not the length of the warm-up, it's the quality of it, like we just talked about. Are you rehearsing at the tempo and at the rhythm and at the mechanics of what you want to run, jump, throw, vault, do? Well, we're not doing enough static stretching. Well, I just showed you over 200 studies that showed you that's not a major factor. Well, it's, you know, it's especially with leg muscles, that you have an imbalance here, an imbalance there. Again, might be a very minimal factor, not a major factor. Well, what is then? What is a major factor that affects our ability to have continuously consistent high-level training and performance? One, we don't decelerate well when we negotiate the ground. And again, you can apply it to sprinting, but it also, even more so, in longer distance type of movements and in throws and jumps. Because you're going to negotiate the ground in some way, shape, or form, whether you have an implement or whether you don't. So how you decelerate and then reaccelerate that negotiation is a major factor. And it's almost easy to see, okay? And you'll hear me talk about this a lot. When people are landing, the more space in between the legs that you can see, the more daylight in between, the more problems you're going to have, okay? In all types of running movements, good running, when this foot is mid-stance, then this knee should be even or even slightly ahead. So you decrease the amount of space or daylight that you see in between. Okay? That's a major factor until for how long they'll be able to go without having some type of muscular or joint or bone type of injury. Improper landing postures, right? We're going to talk about this a little further too, because obviously you can see that and a lot of times with my athletes, I use straight line stick figures, okay? The more straight the stick, the less problem you're going to have, okay? The more bends in the body, the more roundness, the more loops in the stick, the more problems you're going to have. So again, it's about ground negotiation. Lack of movement control at the core of the body, especially when you're using implements, spinning and twisting and having if you're not able to control through here, and when I say core control or core strength, as we like to talk about it, and there'll be another slide emphasizing this, it's more about posture, balance, stability, and more mobility. It's not about how strong my abs are, because a lot of people strengthen their abs and they look like this in an upright position. So, and that looks like this, which is going to lead to problems, right? So all those lead to your inability to negotiate the ground efficiently, okay? And I'll get into this slide a little more, because this is exactly what we're talking about. This is commonplace conditioning. Doesn't matter what sport. You can see it on a basketball court, you see it on a football field, you see it on a track. It's commonplace conditioning, but we'll analyze that in a few more slides. Some of this is what's the right word to use? Some of this is a decrease of what our youth has from just playing, just having normal play, okay? So if you look at all the events in track and field, and then you can even look, if you coach other sports, look at those other sports that you work with. The one common factor in everything is there's a rhythm to it. There's a rhythm to performance. The better the rhythm and coordination, the better the performance. So my job is to make people stronger, faster, more agile. It's my job. That's what I was hired to do. But if I don't make the rhythm of the performance and the movements stronger, faster, and more agile, then am I truly doing my job? If they come out of the weight room and they can bench press a lot more, and they can, like you saw the picture of the heavy squat, and don't get me wrong, I do those things. I train those things depending on the athlete and the event and those kind of things. But what truly helps them perform better? Yes, we need the stronger athlete, but the movements need to be stronger. So I'll train those, I'll use the weight room to train the movements to get stronger and more powerful and work through their distances better. Rhythm is a huge factor. And this is the art of what we do. The art of us as coaches is to blend how they were when they were being playful and had a great rhythm to how they played, and then apply that to the structure of actually training. Okay? I use skateboard as an example. Anybody in the room a skateboard coach? Awesome. Because you don't see a lot of skateboard coaches. But if you take some time to watch skateboarders, and around our place, there's thousands of them because, we got cement everywhere. We got all these buildings and everything on campus. And even though the administration is always trying to kick the skateboarders away, they just find another place to go, and they do. So if you just sit and watch some skateboarders, there's nobody really coaching them. They're having a great time. So one person tries a trick. Then the other person says, well, I can do that trick. And so then they try the trick. And then they try to add a little something to that trick. And then they just go, and there's falling down. And but there's probably less injuries in skateboarding than there is when we have a track practice. It's like, because they're just they're having fun and they're playing, but there's a structure to the fact that they're trying to improve their skills and their ability to perform and especially trying to one-up each other, like, okay, you did that with a spin, and I'm going to do it with a loop-de-loop, and all those kinds of things. So it's this, again, the art of us as coaches is how do we take free play, where they're really having fun, and engaged in trying to improve that fun, and take it and be structured with it from there. So we talked about rhythm, so we can't have rhythm unless we have synchronized movement patterns, okay? So over the course of 3 different summers, a long time ago, first summer I did this was 1995, then I did it again in 1997, then I did it again in 1999. And I had a great audience of subjects. I had almost an entire football team, I had a volleyball team, I had a number of different track athletes and a men's basketball team. So I had over 100 subjects to do this with, okay? And what we would do is when they would come in each day, we had what we call a normal warm-up. You're going to see a little bit of the normal warm-up here in some video. It was just a dynamic warm-up, okay? So maybe they just did the normal warm-up, and then we gave them anywhere from 15 minutes to an hour of a break, and then we did a standing long jump test, and then a 10-meter sprint. Another day they came in, it was the normal warm-up, and then a squat. 4 sets of 4 reps, working up to about 85% of a 4-rep max. I was doing this because back in '95, it was all about Ben Johnson, the Canadian sprinter. He had his best 100-meter performances when he squatted heavy the morning before. I said, okay, well, I need to look at this, and this is something. Well, we now know he had other things going on there too. So, but still, want to see. Maybe there's something there with it. Okay. Another time, they came in, and instead of a squat, it was snatch, power snatch from the floor, all the way up over the head, 4 sets of 4. Again, working up to around 85% of a 4-rep max for the snatch. Other time, it was a squat jump, just a single squat jump. This was some research out of Australia from Warren Young, same guy that was talking about dynamic. He said if you take 30% of your body weight and you do these jumps, then that's the true expression of certain power. So we did. We had sandbags. We had different sandbags, 30%. And it was just a counter movement, squat jump, reset, do 4 sets of 4. And then the final one was no load, real elastic reactive knee tuck jumps. Had your hands here, or you could use your arms, and it was how quick can you get off the ground, how high can you get in the air. 4 sets of 4. And again, there was different breaks, and we did it all summer. So you didn't just do this first, this second. It was random. You never know what you were going to do that day, that type of thing. And then you always had the jumps and about 3 reps of a 10-meter sprint. The only thing that was different in 97 and 99 is I changed a couple of these exercises around a little bit, but the theme was the same. And here's what we find. Obviously, the warm-up was still better than no warm-up at all, but that was in all the other studies too. The squat was better. You squat heavy, relatively. It's going to be better than just a dynamic warm-up. But it wasn't really any better than just jumping. Not having a heavy load, but trying to be elastic and reactive. But neither of those were better than trying to be fast with a load, the 30% of body weight sandbag. That was better across all subjects and all kinds. But what's the big deal here? The big deal is the snatch. It was head and shoulders, and it was the same thing 2 summers later, and it was the same thing 2 summers. The exercises that had some load, but a whole lot of speed, and was the real thing for me was toenails to fingernails, floor to ceiling type of movement. Synchronized, coordinated movements that also had strength and speed was always the major factor there. So again, we get back into this, what are we rehearsing? What protocols are we rehearsing in order to perform better? because obviously they're not only faster, but they jump better. So, orchestration, coordination. Goes back to, again, a child's ability to play, and then taking that ability to just play and have fun with it and just go for it and be engaged in it, and structure. How do we structure that then? Okay, and there's always got to be a little chaos. There's definitely more chaos in a snatch than there is in a squat. There's more things that can go different directions and stuff like that. And so we get back to coordination. Okay, this is, if you're familiar with any of the Franz Bosch stuff, this is his quote. Coordination is what ultimately limits the ability to express force. So I've been a sprint coach for a long time, and I like to think that I've really worked hard at it and do as much as I can with it. Pretty much everybody knows Noah Lyles, right? In fact, he just set a 60-meter record a couple days ago, or last weekend. But I have his picture here. This is from the World Championships a couple years ago, so 2020s. Anybody know who this is? He's actually a former University of Oregon runner. That's where this picture was taken. That's an old Hayward Field. That's a new Hayward Field over there. But Mac Robinson, you probably know his brother, Jackie Robinson, right? Played for first black in Major League Baseball and stuff like that. Well, Mac is the older brother, and he was the world record holder in the 200 meters at the 1936 Olympics, except for one thing. He finished second. He broke the world record in the 200 meters, but the fact that he was a little bit behind Jesse Owens means he really didn't break the record, because Jesse Owens had the record. So, but his time was the fastest 200 meters of all time also. But the reason I use his slide from 1930s to 2020s is the technical portion's the same. They're both coming off the left leg, like we talked about. They're past mid-stance, so the knees are already driving, but the postures, those kind of things are the same. So my point is, there are some different things. The shoes are definitely different. In fact, the shoes for him now are different than they were just 5 years ago in terms of performance parameters. Obviously, the uniforms are different. The surfaces are different, okay? Yeah, that's leather shoes with spikes that are about as long as my finger, and that's a cinder track, but probably a little more dirt than cinder. And he came out of blocks. He had to use his shovel and dig 2 holes in the ground and then come out of there. So my point is, me as a sprint coach, have I really advanced training that much? When you take those factors into it, he trains very well. He's awesome in his lifting and sprint training and stuff like that. I'm sure he was too, but he also had to spend most of his time. He was a street sweeper. He had to dig ditches. He had to do things like that. We didn't call it training, but it probably helped him perform and have the postural protocols that we're talking about. Okay? But again, the things that have to go against physics, the ability to negotiate the ground across a certain surface with the gravitational pull of the earth, those things haven't changed. Yes, shoes and uniforms and track surfaces, all those kinds of things have changed to help performance. But how about us in terms of developing protocols for the human body and performance? Okay? For me, it comes down, you've seen this, I usually have 3 slides, I've condensed it. The ability to do all things is your ability to hinge and or tilt at the hips. And again, so I talked about if you see me running from the side, then you know I'm negotiating the ground pretty well, because when this is mid-stance, this knee is slightly ahead or at least even. Well, when you're looking from in front, and that's a lot of times during sprint practice, that's why I go stand, the other coaches are standing on the side. I go down past the finish and I watch them come at me, because this is what I'm looking for. I know they're negotiating the ground properly with the right protocols if we have that swing hip tilt. then we know that the knee's going, then we know we can lift and then whip back down. Not supposed to lose that on the whip. Okay? So in order to, it's all just preparation. It's preparing to negotiate the ground better. Okay? But it also applies if you work with jumpers, especially triple jumpers. If they're not getting good hip tilt, then they're not going to be able to negotiate through their phases. The step, the hop, the jump, those kind of phases. Because if you can tilt the hip, then you can project the hip better. You can drive the knees apart. You can work either high or for distance from there. And also your ability to whip from the hip. So yeah, you thought I was going to show a sprinter whipping from the hip. But it also applies to throwing and the ability to finish. Okay? It's loading and it's this ability to move yourself around the hips. If these things are important, then do the protocols for performance match that when we're training. Okay? So again, let's go back to look at running. And for me, again, it's not just sprinting. It's anybody that wants to negotiate the ground well. Okay? You have horizontal loading, which is what we know as acceleration. And then you have vertical loading, which I like to call reacceleration. You're reaccelerating down from above. We always talk about negative backside mechanics, positive front side mechanics. We've kind of overdone this in the last probably the last decade. We've almost gotten too much front side mechanics because now we don't work on finishing push even at high level, high velocity sprinting. Obviously, pushing to increase ground reaction force is a big deal in acceleration. So that's positive backside mechanics, this ability to drive the knees further apart than the feet. And again, that's watchable, that's observable. If I can see the knees driving farther than the feet, then I know that there's good hip projection and acceleration. If I see the feet coming out farther than the knees, then I know we're going to be overstriding and we're going to be hitting the brakes with every step and we're not going to negotiate the ground in the same way. Okay? We want to have the proper shin angles. We want to be able to increase ground reaction forces here, decrease ground contact time here. Okay? Simpler way to say it is acceleration is piston mechanics. Top speed is whip mechanics. And you're saying, okay, but you're going to tell that to an ultra marathon runner. His shortest distance is a 50 miler and it's up and down hills and stuff like this. I said, yeah, I'm going to get him to try to be more piston-like even in these kind of situations, because the better they can move at the hip and less pendulum at the knee, the less problems they're going to have and the less time on the ground that they're going to spend. And when you're running 50 miles, you don't want to spend that much more time on the ground. So, okay, so how do we do this? Let's begin with the warm-up like anything else. We're going to warm up. Okay, I don't even call it that anymore. We're going to rehearse. Line up. We're going to get rehearsal. So one of the first things we do always is what we call these top-of-the-head drills. And some of you may have seen me do this before or work with this. It's all about getting the top of your head as close to the ceiling as possible without completely leaving the ground. And there's a couple ways to do it. There's what we call knee grab, which is forward plane of movement. You're still moving forward when you do the second one, which is called frog style. And then the third one is we call march. So those three exercises, and usually we'll do 1 or 2 sets of 10 meters of just that thing. It's either knee grab or frog style or whip. And I actually have some video, so I don't know why I'm doing that. So. But those are the first 3 exercises we always do. And I've already rehearsed acceleration or those push piston mechanics with the first one. I've already rehearsed hip tilt with the frog style, and I've rehearsed the lift and whip of high-speed mechanics with the third drill. So in the first minute and a half of our warm-up, we're already rehearsing these, and you saw the tempo that I was doing it at. Okay? Then we work to different types of lunging. We call it push lunging, because it's the posture that you want to do it at, whether it's work across the ring in in shot and disc or whether it's down the runway or across, it's the same kind of, whether we lunge forward, whether we lunge side to side, whether we lunge backward, it's working those postures, okay? And then we get into the more movement stuff where we're doing all kinds of skipping and shuffling. Let me see if this will play. Figured I have to do it down here. Okay, no problem. So here we go with some top of the head drills. Don't just notice the technique, but hopefully notice the tempo. And I'm going to tell you right now, this is a session with sprinters and hurdlers that goes at 6:30 in the morning. So they roll out of bed. This is what we do. They don't come in, wait, coach, hold up. Gotta
attack down.
We just, yeah, see, not attacking.
Everything's
down.
a push.
I thought I cut the audio out. But I can't do that because that's kind of annoying. Maybe I can. Let me show the next one. So the idea of the push lunges is there's no rocking. There's no rocking back and forth. Everything is pushed in a certain sense. I did take the audio out of this. All right? Everything is working. Okay, crawling and climbing. Now we're rehearsing hip tilt. Some people call this elephant walk, which is fine, because the only way you do it, you don't get to bend your knees at first, and then you work from hip tilt to hip tilt and knee drive. Hip tilt and knee drive. So we're just rehearsing the hips doing what they're supposed to do when we want to run, jump, throw, vault, do whatever from there. And then, again, this is about the first minute and a half of the warm-up. They accelerate. But wait, coach, I haven't stretched yet. Hasn't been an issue. Okay? So then again, I talked about failure practice. There's also the negative practice. Okay? See this all the time. Butt kick drill. What are the constructs of why a butt kick drill? Well, coach, it just gets, I feel so much looser in my quads. But it's negative rehearsal. Okay? It's not driving the knees apart. It's driving the feet farther apart than the knees. Okay? You see it all the time. You see it in all kinds of deals. Same thing with people that are trying to be more agile. They're doing all kinds of things with the feet, and the hips aren't going anywhere. True agility is how you get your hips to go whatever directions you need to go, either around the ring or through the phases of jumps or those kind of things. Okay? Same thing, a lot of things that we do just as, okay, this is how you get your glute to fire. Okay? I still haven't figured that out. I wonder if Mac Robinson and Jesse Owens' glute never fired. Or if anybody even bothered to check if it did. Okay? But the whole idea is, okay, we're trying to train a muscle to fire. So you're reaching out, feet farther apart than the knees, and then you're pulling back. You're sliding out, and then what are you rehearsing? You're rehearsing pulling. Pulling is negative to how we want to move anywhere, on any field, court, thing. So, again, I understand it. It's a therapeutic thing to get a muscle in the body to do what it's supposed to do, okay? But if this becomes a majority of our training, then we're rehearsing things that are negative to performance. It's not a performance protocol. And I told you I'd show this slide again. Again, you see this everywhere. And they're sweating. And I'm sure some of them, when they finish over here, they're puking and all this stuff. And they're dying, and the coaches are going, this is awesome. This is great training. This is what we need. But what were they rehearsing? We talked about good running mechanics, good performing on a field or a court in running. This foot lands, this knee is either equal or slightly ahead. How much of that do you see? How much daylight are You see an in-between. So what are they really training? They're training how to get slower and how to be overstructured and how to have more hamstring and groin. That's what they're training. So negative training. So again, talked about guidelines for effective development. What's your checklist? This is my checklist. Is it the posture that I want to see when they're performing? Are they negotiating the ground with the right balance points when they're going to win their event? The stability and the mobility. Are their hips going through the range of motions that they need to in order to win or perform at a high level? Okay? So we go back to this. And again, I've been around a long time, but I'm not the smartest cat in the box. So I don't always understand everything. But this is, especially with my young coaches, this is a big exercise. They got them all doing, they call them dead bugs, right? Dead bug exercise. Well, the reason they call it a dead bug and not a lively bug, because dead bugs don't move well, okay? So this is supposed to be a core development exercise. We're just, coach, we're just trying to get their core developed. How? They're laying flat on their back. Their movements don't go through a great range of motion. Their hips don't move through a great, where do you check off? Posture. Well, how much posture do you need to lay flat on your back? Balance. How much balance do you need to lay flat on? How much stability? Nothing gets checked off with a dead bug exercise. So again, I'm not the smartest guy. And they're loving it because they get to lay down to work out and they get a little bit of ab soreness. They think, this is awesome. I'm really getting somewhere. No, you're not. You're actually training to be a sitter when you try to run. That's what you're training. That leads to this, okay? Daylight between the knees. What did I just do? Oh. Daylight between the knees, landing on the heels, poor posture. This leads to this. That's what we're rehearsing, okay? And then you take the fact that they got to go to class and sit like this for the majority of the day. What are the protocols for performance here, okay? I'd rather do 3 reps. It doesn't even have to be heavy weight. If they just had a stick or an empty bar, you can check all these off with an overhead squat or an overhead lunge. Those are big things I do, especially with distance runners, because I want those kind of postures and those kind of movements at the hip and those kind of things. I'd rather have 3 reps of that than 30 reps of the other thing or 300 reps of the other thing, because this rehearses more of this and helps her finish this. Now her hips can get extended. She can get all the way through. You see those kinds of things out of the movements we were rehearsing either in that warm-up. She does that warm-up, not just sprinters and hurdlers. She does that top of the head drill warm-up and all those kind of things. Okay, so again, there's other ways. There's other methods of dynamic warm-up. Hurdle mobility, awesome way to do it. You talked about the climbing and the crawling. All we're looking for is those ranges of motion about the torso and the hip, flexion, extension, and rotation at the hip. That ability to tilt, lift, whip. And again, true core training, in our definition now, is handling your own body weight and stressing and developing torso movements. Do I do laying down core strength exercises? Only in this version. And they're not planks. They're actually movements. So they're just not holding that plank. They actually have to either lift back on the hip or supine lift up with the hip. It's all flexion and extension about the hip from those movements, okay? Or they're doing usually more upright movements. Twisting lunges, pushing out of it, those kind of things. Oops, going the wrong direction. Or other kinds of things where, again, posture, balance, stability, and mobility is stressed. We're stressing those type of things. And again, for me, and these are actually, he was an Olympic steeplechaser or world steeplechaser, and she was a 2-time Olympian in 800 meters. A single leg squat does more for me core training, core development, than 300 crunches, sit-ups, dead bugs, whatever you want to do, because it checks the list. Posture, balance, stability, mobility. She has to hold her posture. She's got to be able to go down to hip rotation and come back up. Obviously, balance and stability are a huge deal in that. So if she can do 3 reps of that, you can save all the dead bugs for somebody that wants to end up like that. Sorry, but it's just, I get tired of seeing a lot of these things. Rotational hip demands in training. Rotate at the hip with a stable and erect posture. Okay? Do we do half squats and quarter squats with sprinters? Yes, we do, but only for acceleration work. But it's not a steady diet of that, because again, if you want more whip from the hip and less hamstring problems by casting out and getting them to, then you'll do more things that engage the hips, either in that version or more single leg, efficient ranges of motion. Okay. This is a single leg good morning. Probably seen it before. And this leads to many other things. So eventually she'll go single leg good morning into a lunge, and then she'll push away from single leg good morning into a step on. So literally, she'll be in that single leg good morning and then drive away from it and land on something that's a little bit higher. So she's got to not only push away from that block, she's got to drive that knee and get the hip moving and work away from there. So we do it even with people that don't come out of the starting blocks, because it's just, again, hip hinge, hip extension, hip whip. So let's talk a little bit again. This is about performance and protocols for performance. And a lot of people say, well, the reason we do this is for, less injuries. We can perform better if we can practice all the time so we don't have as many injuries. Okay? So let's just take, most people have dealt with hamstring injuries before. Okay? Regardless if it's just sprinters or any kind of athlete, they, at some point in time, deal with some type of soft tissue injury, usually the hamstring. So let's just take that. Way back in 2004, we found this research study by Sherry and her group. And what they looked at is they had some hamstring issues. And so they put the people in 2 different groups. One group, they just static stretched and did isolated muscle exercises. Passive leg curls, like with somebody doing resistance, things like that. And then finally, regular leg curls, either with a band or with some type of machine, things like that. And then, of course, the good old ice to reduce. Okay? The other group, they did other things. They did stuff where they had to move at the hip and also stabilize the trunk. And then, of course, they iced. And what they found was the number of days it took for the static stretch group and isolated muscle, just work on the hamstring group, took them over a month to get back to full training. Okay? And then 6 months or 12 months or 18 months later, the chance of that same injury happening again to that same area was over 50%. So half of them had that same injury again. Okay? And then even more of them within a year. The group that had more movement involved, their agility and their trunk stabilization, things like that, less than a month, a little over 20, about 21 days, 3 weeks, they were back to full training. The number of reoccurring injuries to that same body part, none. Right? And even in small percentage over a year's time from there. So I thought that was a pretty interesting study. So I just started keeping track. And then about 9 years later, Askling and his group, this was out of Norway, they did a similar study. Okay, same 2 groups. Conventional treatment. You hamstring pull, okay, we're going to take you, we're going to shut you down for a couple of days, we're going to give you a lot of treatment, we're going to work your muscle, we're going to massage it, we're going to do that kind of thing, and then we're going to ice it. Versus lengthening and loading. They did a little bit of lifting on it. Okay? Stretch them. Okay, thank you. Okay? Same thing happened. Got back sooner, got quicker. Why? Because movement is medicine. And especially if movement that's rehearsed properly. So I do the same thing. Since 2007, I've been keep track. Okay? Hamstring injury occurs, or groin injury, or quad injury, or anything like that. If they've just done passive treatment, I note that. If they say, hey, you can take them right away, and I get them within 24 hours, and we do range of motion, usually good mornings, overhead squats, these kinds of exercises. May even have to start out with a stick. And some people say, well, what grade of injury? It doesn't matter to me. The trainers can grade it grade 1, grade 5, it doesn't matter. It can be torn, it can be, if we do a little bit of this, and sometimes it's like, the good morning is like, they can barely get past there. And I actually look for pain. Controlled, not this sharp stabbing thing, but we want to start breaking up scar tissue. That's the biggest thing. If you're too passive, scar tissue develops, and that's why re-injury occurs months later. Okay? But if you can do these kind of movements, and then we start getting into drills, same thing. It's usually over a month to get them back. The first way, we get them back within 10 to 15 days on average these days. And again, the chance of that same area injuring themselves, you know, because everybody will say, well, you're just trying to get them back quickly. Well, yeah. But that doesn't mean they're going to be injured more often, according to this. Okay, so again, it's all about drills and a system. And what are you really rehearsing? What are you practicing? Are you doing the things that we talked about? Movement at the hip instead of movement at the knee? And so a lot of these videos I'm showing you were actually from the pandemic. Because guess I should have let that run a little. So the emphasis is in not getting up and down a track, but you can do this in a hallway. You can do these drills that everybody calls mock drills. Well, when Gerard Mock designed them, he designed them because he was living in Poland, and he was a sprint coach. And how do you train your sprinters in December and January and February when there's 6 feet of snow out there? And they don't have like fancy indoor facilities. You get a hallway, you put a mattress at the end of the hallway, and you drills up and down the hallway, just like me in my front room. Don't ask my wife about that. Okay? And what are we practicing? We're working on piston and whip. Piston and whip. And the drills don't just do that, but the tempo and the rhythm of performance is what we're rehearsing. Okay? And then the last slide is, the other suggestion is, I do this all the time. I have to reevaluate, what am I doing that takes away? Threw leg curl machines out of the weight room 35 years ago and haven't regretted it. And say, oh, wow, shit, wish we had those leg curl machines back because we're having all these issues. Okay? Same thing. If part of your warm-up is jogging, why? What are you rehearsing with jogging? Okay? Don't even let the distance runners jog. If you're going to run, run. But this, it's just rehearsing moving at the knee instead of moving at the hip. Okay, and we already talked about there's good therapy, but evaluate the therapy. Is it rehearsing pulling, or is it rehearsing pushing and proper hip movements? Okay, and then again, I work with some really high-level distance runners, and so how do you get your mileage in if you can't go outside every day and do things like that? Well, you got treadmills, we got underwater treadmills, we got alter Gs, all that kind of stuff, but just watch them long enough. And again, if you're standing behind them and you see the bottom of their foot for long periods of time, they're moving at the knee, they're not moving at the hip. And the treadmill's just fostering that. So a little bit, yeah, but we've had to retrain people how to run properly after they spent too much time on the alter G, those kind of things. So what direction do we want to go? Thank you.